Very good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss chapter 1, the living world. In that, we are going to discuss taxonomy and systematics. What is taxonomy? Taxonomy derived from two Greek words, taxis and nomos. Taxis, arrangement, nomos, meaning law. Taxonomy is a science of arrangement of living organisms along with classification, description, identification and naming of organism, which includes all flora and fauna including microorganisms of the world. The word taxonomy was coined by Augustine Pyramus de Candolle in the year 1813. Taxonomy is a theoretical study of classification with well-defined principles, rules and procedure. Aristotle is called the father of taxonomy, classical taxonomy, and Carolus Linnaeus is the father of modern taxonomy. Let me pass on to systematics. System, which means sequence. The objectives of taxonomy and systematics are very similar. Their goal is to classify organisms with stipulated rules. The main criteria of systematics is identifying, describing, naming, arranging, preserving and documenting the organisms. Apart from the above said features, evolutionary history of the species and the environmental adaptation and interrelationship between species are also being investigated in systematics. Next, let me pass on to history of classification. Early classification of organisms were based on only two criteria: beneficial, that is useful, or harmful animals. An ancient classification system recognized 5 animal groups. What are they? Domestic, wild, creeping, flying, and sea animals. Initially, the classification was based on organisms' fundamental characteristics such as the habitat, living place, and morphology. External characters only. Aristotle was the first to classify all animals in his History of Animals, Historia Animalium in Latin. He attempted a basic classification of all living organisms into plants and animals. Animals were classified based on locomotion, walking, terrestrial, flying, aerial, and swimming, aquatic. Based on the presence or absence of red blood, he classified the animals into two, as Enaima with blood and those without blood as Anaima. Aristotle's classification system had limitations and many organisms were not fitting into his classification. For example, the tadpoles of frogs are born in water and have gills, but when they metamorphosed into adult frogs, they have lungs and can live both in water and on land. How to classify frogs and where to place them? Aristotle classified organisms based on locomotion. Hence, birds, bats, and flying insects were grouped together just by observing one single characteristic feature, the flying ability. On the contrary to the above said example, the ostrich, emu, and penguin are all birds but cannot fly. So Aristotle would not have classified them as birds. In spite of these limitations, Aristotle's classification system was followed for more than 2000 years up to 1700. After Aristotle, his student Theophrastus continued his research on the classification of plants, and he was known as the father of botany. There was a huge gap till 16th century. Then the English naturalist John Ray wrote several important works through his life. His most important contribution was the establishment of species as the ultimate unit of taxonomy. In 1682, he published the Methodus Plantarum Nova, which contained about 18,000 plant species, a result of a relatively narrow species concept. His complicated classification was based on many combined characters as opposed to earlier taxonomies. John Ray also aimed at publishing a complete system of nature which included works on mammals, reptiles, birds, fishes, and insects. The Swedish biologist Carolus Linnaeus, father of modern taxonomy and founder of modern systematics, developed a scientific system of taxonomy and binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature, every plant or the organism having two words, which is still in use. Aristotle to Linnaeus employed easily observable single to few traits for classification of organisms. With increased knowledge of the several biological domains, many characters were considered for classifying organisms. This represented the phase of classical taxonomy, which was based on overall similarities or affinities derived from morphology, anatomy, and embryology of organisms. A modification of this system is the numerical taxonomy, which evolved in the 1950s. This system evaluates the resemblances and differences through statistical methods followed by computer analysis to establish the numerical degree of relationship among individuals. Later on, biologists initiated studies on the evolutionary and genetic relationships among organisms, which led to the emergence of phylogenetic classification or cladistics. It is an evolutionary classification based on how a common ancestry was shared. Cladistics classification summarizes the genetic differences between all species in the phylogenetic tree. Ernest Haeckel introduced the method of representing evolutionary relationship with the help of a tree diagram known as cladogram. This system of classification takes into account ancestral characters, traits of basic body design which would be in the entire group, and derived characters, that is traits whose structure and functions differ from those of ancestral characters. One or more derived characters which appeared during evolution resulted in the formation of new subspecies. In a cladogram, each evolutionary step produces a branching, and all the members of the branch would possess the derived characters which will not be seen in organisms below the particular branch point. Arranging organisms on the basis of their similar and derived characters which differ from the ancestral character produced a phylogenetic tree or cladogram. Depending on the system of classification, organisms were classified into 2 or 3 kingdoms, later on 4, 5, 6, and now into 7 kingdoms. R.H. Whittaker in the year 1969 proposed the 5-kingdom classification. The kingdoms defined by him were Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia, based on the cell structure, mode of nutrition, mode of reproduction, and phylogenetic relationship. Classification has become a long way and now takes into an account even molecular level DNA and RNA identification. The advancement in molecular techniques and biochemical assays has led to a new classification, the 3-domain classification. So the 3-domain includes archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. So far we discussed taxonomy, systematics, and history of classification. So what are the different system of classification that we will discuss in the next class? That's all about today's class. Thank you.